The Clockmaker's Confession. The gaslights of Victorian London flickered as Detective Oscar paced outside the renowned shop of clockmaker Ambrose Finch, now a scene of mystery. The lifeless body of Ambrose lay slumped over his workbench, surrounded by ticking clocks, each frozen at different, seemingly arbitrary times. Oscar noted every detail, the silence filled only by the occasional tick and the soft scrape of Harriet, a local historian, adjusting her spectacles beside him. Harriet's fascination with clocks brought her to Ambrose's shop often, but today she was here as a witness to his peculiar end. Oscar noticed that Ambrose's prized pocket watch lay cracked open on the counter, its hands fixed at 4:15, a time he scribbled in his notebook. This watch was his masterpiece, Harriet whispered, her voice edged with reverence and suspicion as she scanned the cluttered workshop. Oscar traced his finger along the dusty shelves lined with broken gears and clock parts, feeling as though the clocks were watching him. A chill crept over him as he examined the clock hands, each pointing to different times. It seemed like a message waiting to be deciphered. Rumors had long whispered about Ambrose's past, but now those secrets felt as though they were ticking just beneath the surface. Harriet murmured about the local law surrounding Ambrose's shop, tales of missing persons and unsolved crimes over the years. Oscar nodded, recalling that each unsolved case bore a mysterious symbol carved into an abandoned clock left at the scene. Though the police had dismissed the connections as coincidence, Oscar could never quite shake the feeling of a hidden pattern. He bent down, inspecting Ambrose's cold hand, frozen as if he'd been clutching something that wasn't there anymore. Harriet pointed to a clock on the far wall, its hands locked at 11:47, a time that seemed random but felt strangely important. Oscar's eyes narrowed, wondering if the times represented dates, ages, or something even more intricate. Across the dim workshop, Theo appeared, the former apprentice with sharp eyes that darted to the clocks before meeting Oscar's gaze. Theo's arrival was no coincidence, as he claimed he had come to see his old mentor but seemed unfazed by Ambrose's death. Oscar observed Theo's movements, noting how his fingers hovered over the clocks as if arranging them in his mind. "Each clock tells a story, Detective," Theo remarked cryptically, his tone void of the grief one might expect. Harriet shivered, sensing a dark undercurrent in Theo's words, which seemed to imply he knew more than he let on. Oscar decided to question Theo directly, asking about Ambrose's past and any enemies the old clockmaker might have had. Theo simply shrugged, his face impassive, but there was a flicker in his eyes at the mention of enemies. "Time has a way of catching up with people," Theo said, almost to himself, as he adjusted a dusty wall clock. Harriet exchanged a look with Oscar, noting how Theo's words lingered in the air like a hidden warning. Oscar carefully catalogued each clock's time, arranging them in his notes in search of a pattern he couldn't yet see. Harriet suggested that perhaps the times corresponded to events in Ambrose's life, each clock marking a memory. Oscar agreed, flipping through his notes on unsolved cases, comparing dates to the times on each of the clocks. It was then that he realized the times eerily matched the hours reported in each of the unsolved murders. Harriet gasped as Oscar revealed his findings, her hand covering her mouth in shock at the terrible implications. The clocks seemed to chronicle not just Ambrose's life but the lives he'd taken or, perhaps, helped to take. Ambrose's legacy wasn't just clocks, Oscar murmured, feeling the weight of his discovery press down on him. Theo's expression hardened as he listened, his jaw clenched as though holding back an unspoken truth. Oscar pressed him further, questioning if Ambrose had ever involved him in any of the crimes hinted by the clocks. Theo looked away, his silence more telling than any confession, as if admitting to a partnership long buried. Ambrose had secrets, but so does every clockmaker, Theo said finally, his voice barely a whisper. Harriet's eyes widened as she pieced together the implication, that Theo may have known of Ambrose's dark deeds all along. Theo revealed how Ambrose taught him the art of clockmaking, and, perhaps, the art of deception itself. Oscar was struck by how Theo's knowledge of clocks mirrored the mystery Ambrose had left behind. Harriet pointed to a small clock hidden in the shadows, its time set to 2:25, another clue in the twisted puzzle. Oscar compared it to his notes, realizing it matched the time of a particularly notorious unsolved murder. The realization dawned on him that Ambrose had used his clocks to document each crime, his own macabre confession. Theo's face grew tense as Oscar voiced his theory, his demeanor shifting from indifference to barely concealed anxiety. "You wanted this found, didn't you, Theo?" Oscar asked, watching the apprentice's reaction with intense scrutiny. Theo's lips pressed together, and he finally admitted he'd come to confront Ambrose over the crimes. "I set the clocks, Detective," Theo confessed, his eyes dark. It was the only way to expose him for what he'd done. Harriet's gasp filled the silence as Oscar processed the coded confession Theo had constructed with each clock. Theo explained how he'd arranged the clocks, each time a breadcrumb leading to the crimes Ambrose had orchestrated. "Ambrose took lives and hid behind timepieces," Theo said bitterly. "I wanted the world to see his sins." Oscar nodded, understanding now that Theo's anger stemmed from betrayal, from the years spent under Ambrose's spell. "Why not go to the police?" Harriet asked, her voice trembling with the weight of Theo's revelation. "No one would have believed me," Theo replied, his gaze steely. "I needed them to find the proof themselves." Oscar realized that Theo had, in a way, been Ambrose's final victim, his life shaped by the crimes he'd been forced to witness. "So, you became judge, jury, and executioner," Oscar concluded, the words hanging heavy in the room. Theo nodded solemnly, acknowledging his role in ending the life of his once beloved mentor. Harriet looked at the clocks, now still, each one a silent testament to lives lost and secrets kept. Oscar moved to arrest Theo, but there was a strange respect in his eyes as he placed the cuffs on the former apprentice. As he led Theo out, Oscar glanced back at the clocks, feeling they would forever haunt him with their silent testimony. Harriet watched them go, understanding that the clocks, once objects of fascination, were now relics of a dark history. The shop fell silent, the clocks unmoving, as though time itself had paused to reflect on the sins hidden within its gears.